10:07 a.m. The teacher's lounge at Nea Philadelphia Elementary School in Athens was silent, except for the sound of an envelope sliding across the table. "Ms. Elena Petros, you are officially dismissed." The words echoed like a sentence. 15 years of devotion, hundreds of children taught, and all it took was one act of compassion for everything to collapse. As her colleagues looked away, Elena held the letter with trembling hands, trying to understand how helping a hungry boy had become a crime. But to understand how one act of faith changed 2 lives forever, we must return to the morning when goodness dared to defy the rules. 48 hours earlier, the sun was rising over Athens, painting the cracked walls of Nea Philadelphia Elementary in soft gold. Inside room 2B, the smell of chalk mixed with the sound of pencils scratching paper. For 15 years, Elena Petros had taught English and history to children who often arrived at school hungry, but left a little wiser, a little braver. Her salary was modest, her classroom old, yet she treated it as sacred ground, a place where knowledge was the one thing no one could take away. That morning she noticed a boy sitting in the last row, silent, eyes half closed. His notebook was empty. "Giannis?" she called gently. He looked up, startled, tall for his age, shy, his clothes worn and slightly too small. He tried to smile. "I forgot my breakfast," he whispered in Greek, embarrassed. Elena's heart tightened. She had heard the same excuse before, from children whose parents couldn't afford much. But something in Giannis's tone wasn't just hunger. It was exhaustion, the kind that comes from carrying a family's weight before you're even grown. When recess came, Elena walked to the teacher's lounge, opened her lunchbox, and quietly wrapped half her sandwich in a napkin. She found Giannis sitting alone under the old fig tree. "Here," she said softly. "No one learns well on an empty stomach." He hesitated. "But miss, I can't." "You can," she interrupted. "And one day when you're able, you'll give it back to someone else." Those words, simple, almost careless, would echo for years. Because that moment, unnoticed by anyone else, was when Elena Petros planted a seed that would grow in ways she could never imagine. Later that day, she overheard the principal speaking to a district official. They wanted to remove certain families from the school rolls: immigrants, refugees, anyone causing administrative complications. Elena froze behind the doorway as she heard one name on the list: Giannis Antetokounmpo. Her pulse quickened. She knew what it meant to be unwanted. She had grown up in poverty herself, raised by a mother who believed that teaching was a form of rebellion against despair. That evening, as the sky turned orange over Athens, Elena made a decision that would soon cost her everything. She would not let that boy disappear. The next morning, the corridors of Nea Philadelphia Elementary hummed with the usual chaos: sneakers squeaking on the tiled floor, laughter echoing through the stairwell, the smell of old paper and cafeteria bread mixing in the air. But for Elena Petros, everything felt strangely heavy. She had barely slept. The list of names she had overheard the previous day haunted her like a ghost that refused to fade. Giannis Antetokounmpo, the quiet boy with gentle eyes who never complained, who stayed after class to help her erase the blackboard. The boy whose family sold sunglasses on the streets of Athens to survive. She knew what administrative complications meant in Greece's struggling public schools. It was a polite phrase for get rid of the children who don't fit. Refugee kids, immigrant kids, kids who made the statistics inconvenient. That morning, Elena stood in front of her class, chalk in hand, trying to teach the difference between there and there, but her mind kept drifting. Giannis sat in the back, doodling a basketball in the corner of his notebook. When she asked a question, his hand rose slowly, almost apologetically. His pronunciation was awkward, but his effort was flawless. "Perfect, Giannis," she said, smiling. "Remember, mistakes are proof that you're learning." He smiled back faintly. It was a small victory in a world that rarely gave him any. During lunch, Elena walked into the teacher's office where the principal, Mr. Pavlidis, was preparing a folder of documents. "About the transfer requests," she began cautiously. I saw that one of the students— "The decision's final," he interrupted, not looking up. "The ministry needs to balance the numbers. We can't keep everyone." "But he's one of our best students," Elena insisted. "He studies, he helps others, he just—" "Elena," Pavlidis sighed. "You're a good teacher, but this is bigger than you. We have policies." She stood frozen for a moment, her fingers gripping the edge of the desk. Policies. Always the word used to make cruelty sound professional. That night, as the rain tapped against her apartment window, Elena wrote a letter by hand, not to the school, but to the Ministry of Education. She explained that removing Giannis would be an injustice, that schools were meant to protect, not exclude. She signed it quietly, folded the paper, and placed it in an envelope addressed to the regional office. The next morning, she gave it to the courier before school began. It was a small act, but it would ignite something much larger. 2 days later, a man in a dark suit arrived at the school asking for Ms. Petros. "Elena, this is Inspector Karras," said the principal stiffly. "He's here because of a complaint sent from your address." The inspector's tone was calm but cold. "Did you interfere with administrative proceedings regarding student reassignments?" "I defended a child's right to learn," Elena replied. "If that's interference, then yes." There was a long silence, the kind that stretches between two people standing on opposite sides of a moral line. That afternoon, Giannis waited for her after class. "Miss Petros," he said softly, "my mother told me we can stay at the school." "Did you do something?" She hesitated, then smiled. "Sometimes doing the right thing makes noise, Giannis. But don't worry, I can handle noise." What she didn't know was that the noise was already growing beyond her control. Parents complained that she was favoring immigrants. Teachers whispered behind closed doors. The principal stopped greeting her in the hallway. Still, she didn't regret it. She had seen the light in Giannis's eyes when he realized he could keep studying. That was enough. But life has a way of testing how much enough truly is. 3 weeks later, the school inspector returned, this time with a dismissal letter already printed. Elena was accused of unauthorized correspondence with government offices and violation of administrative hierarchy. When she left the building that day, her box of belongings pressed against her chest, she passed Giannis in the courtyard. He looked confused, almost scared. "Miss Petros, what happened?" She forced a smile. "Just a small misunderstanding, my boy. Keep studying. Keep dreaming." He reached into his pocket and handed her a crumpled piece of paper, a drawing of a basketball and a tiny classroom beneath it. At the bottom, he had written, in shaky English letters, "For my teacher, who believes in me." Elena's eyes filled with tears. She didn't know it yet, but that drawing would become the symbol of everything she stood for, and everything she would lose. Because in the world she lived in, believing in the wrong child could cost you everything. And in the world Giannis came from, one person's faith could change a destiny. The sound of the school gate closing behind her echoed longer than it should have. For 15 years, Elena Petros had crossed that gate every morning with a sense of purpose. But that afternoon, the metal clang felt like a final verdict. Athens was loud as always, cars honking, street vendors shouting, stray cats weaving between parked scooters. Yet for her, the city had fallen completely silent. She walked home with her box of books pressed to her chest. Inside were small fragments of her career, chalk, a stack of essays, a mug that read, "Teach with Heart." None of it could explain how doing what was right had led to this. Her apartment in Kipseli was modest but full of warmth. Potted plants on the balcony, photos of former students pinned to the wall, and the smell of strong Greek coffee that had become her one ritual of comfort. She set the box down on the kitchen table and stared at it, wondering how to tell her mother, an elderly woman with arthritic hands who had once been a teacher herself. When the phone rang, Elena hesitated before answering. It was her friend Daphne, a fellow teacher. "Elena, I heard. The whole staff knows. They say the ministry wanted to make an example of you." Elena exhaled softly. for protecting a child. I know, some of us wanted to speak up, but fear wins. Elena finished for her. That night she tried to sleep but couldn't. The rain had returned, tapping against the window like a reminder. She replayed Giannis's face in her mind, the confusion, the fear, the small spark of gratitude. What if he thought she'd abandoned him? The next morning she walked to the street market near Ammonia Square, passing stalls of fruit and cheap sunglasses. And there, just as she had feared, she saw him. Giannis standing beside his mother, helping her organize a blanket of merchandise on the sidewalk. His school bag was gone. His face looked older somehow, heavier. When their eyes met, he froze. "Miss Petros?" Elena forced a smile. "You're supposed to be in school." "They said..." "I can't go back," he murmured, looking down. "They said my family isn't on the list anymore." Something inside her broke again, but this time it was quieter. Not the sharp snap of anger, but the slow unraveling of hope. She reached into her purse, pulled out a folded paper. The letter she'd written to the ministry, the one that had cost her job. She handed it to him. "Keep this," she said. "One day you'll understand what it means." His mother, Veronica, approached, her hands trembling slightly. "Please, Miss Petros, you already lost your job because of us." Elena shook her head. "No. I lost it because I refused to forget what a teacher's job really is." They stood there for a moment, in the noise of the marketplace, 3 lives quietly bound by an act of conscience. Then Giannis hugged her, a short, awkward embrace, but strong enough to remind her why she had chosen this path. Days turned into weeks. Without her salary, Elena struggled to pay rent. The school replaced her with a younger teacher, and the parents' gossip faded as quickly as it had spread. People move on. That's the cruel part about doing something noble. The world rarely stays long enough to applaud. To survive, she began giving private lessons in English, tutoring children in cramped apartments and noisy cafes. She kept one framed photo on her desk, her class from that final year, with Giannis's drawing in the corner, the basketball, and the words, "For my teacher who believes in me." Every night before bed, she would whisper the same phrase her mother had once taught her. Faith in others always finds its way back. Some nights she believed it. Others, it sounded like a fairy tale told to soothe children who didn't yet know how harsh the world could be. Yet destiny has a strange sense of timing. Because while Elena's name was quietly erased from school records, Giannis's name was beginning to echo through Athens. First in street tournaments, then in youth leagues, then whispered by scouts who said, "There's this tall kid from Sepolia, raw but special." Elena didn't know it, but the same boy she had defended was now carrying her lesson with him. Every time he laced his worn-out sneakers, every time he played like he had something to prove. And soon, faith, the same faith that had once cost her everything, was about to find its way back in the most unexpected way imaginable. Years passed, and the rhythm of Athens moved on, indifferent to one woman's quiet loss. Elena Petros became a shadow in her own city, tutoring in cramped apartments, her voice still calm, her lessons still filled with care. She never spoke of the day she was fired. To most people, she was just another teacher trying to make rent. But to her, every student was a reminder of the one boy she had failed to protect. Meanwhile, in the narrow streets of Sepolia, Giannis Antetokounmpo was growing taller, stronger, faster, a storm gathering in slow motion. Word spread among local coaches about the Nigerian kid with impossible hands. Elena sometimes overheard children in cafes talking about him. Giannis scored 20 points, they'd say. He's going to play in America one day. She would smile quietly, pretending not to know who they meant. But at night, she'd unfold that crumpled drawing, the basketball and the small classroom, and whisper to herself, "Faith in others always finds its way back." Still, Faith didn't pay bills. Her mother's health was declining, her savings gone. Elena began selling old books at the flea market on weekends. Sometimes she caught glimpses of basketball posters, young faces lit by the flash of cameras, and felt a pang of pride mixed with pain. She had always told her students that greatness often grows in silence. She just never imagined it would grow so far from her reach. One winter evening, as she prepared lessons by candlelight during a power outage, a neighbor knocked on her door. "Elena, have you seen the news?" "No," she said, confused. The woman handed her a newspaper, Greek teen signed by the NBA, From the Streets to the Stars. There he was. Giannis, older now, smiling shyly at the camera, holding a Milwaukee Bucks jersey. Elena's hands trembled. She sat down slowly, her eyes flooding before she could stop them. "He made it," she whispered. "He really made it." The photo showed him surrounded by his family, the same mother she'd met years ago at the market. And below the image, a single quote, "I'm here because people believed in me when they didn't have to." It was enough to break her, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that her small act of courage had survived the years, the noise, the silence. Months passed. She kept teaching, kept living simply. Then one day she received a letter, no return address, written in careful handwriting. "Dear Ms. Petros, you may not remember me, but I remember everything. The sandwich, the letter, the words you said about giving back. I kept them with me in every game, every moment of doubt. I'll be in Athens next month. I'd like to see you if you'll let me. Giannis." Her heart pounded. 15 years had gone by since that rainy afternoon when she'd lost her job. And now, the boy she'd once defended was coming back as a man the world admired. The morning of the reunion, Elena cleaned her small apartment twice over, set out coffee cups and placed the framed drawing in the center of the table. She told herself not to expect too much. People change. Fame changes people even more. At exactly 11 a.m., a quiet knock echoed through her apartment. When she opened the door, she froze. Giannis stood there, impossibly tall, wearing a black hoodie and a humble smile. But the eyes were the same, kind, uncertain, human. "Miss Petros," he said softly, "do you still give lessons?" She laughed through tears. "Only to those who still listen." What followed was not a grand conversation, but a simple one, about life, about choices, about how sometimes the smallest act of faith can ripple across oceans. When he left, he handed her an envelope. Inside was a note and a single line written in Greek. Faith found its way back. She didn't open the rest until after he was gone. It was a plane ticket to Milwaukee, and with it, a promise. "I want you to see what your lesson became." The letter sat on her kitchen table for 2 days before she dared to touch it again. Milwaukee. Even saying the word out loud felt unreal. For years, Elena Petros had measured her life in bus stops and tutoring hours, and now an airplane ticket with her name printed on it was waiting to take her across the world. Her mother, now frail and often quiet, watched her pack. "Elena," she said softly, "why do you still look nervous?" "Because, Mama," Elena replied with a small laugh. "Sometimes good things scare us more than the bad ones." Her mother smiled, eyes glistening. "Faith always comes home, my child. You taught that to your students. Now it's your turn to believe it." The flight from Athens to Milwaukee felt longer than time itself. She stared out the window, watching clouds drift beneath her, trying to understand how a lifetime of quiet sacrifice had led here, to a city she'd only ever seen on television, to a reunion she had once thought impossible. When the plane landed, a driver met her at the airport holding a sign with her name. The car took her through streets lined with snow, the kind of cold she had never known in Greece. Milwaukee looked both foreign and familiar, like a dream made of concrete and kindness. At the hotel, a note awaited her. "Tomorrow at 10 a.m., please come to Fiserv Forum. Bring nothing, just yourself." That night she barely slept. The city outside her window glowed in gold and blue lights, Bucks colors. And in the distance, she could see banners with Giannis's face on them. But all she could think about was the boy sitting at the back of her classroom, drawing a basketball on his notebook. trying not to look hungry. At 10:00 a.m., sharp, she walked into the vast, echoing interior of the FISERV Forum. The arena was empty except for a few staff members, cameras, and one man standing near the court, tall, broad-shouldered, yet humble in his stance. Giannis turned, smiled, and started walking toward her. "Miss Petros," he said, voice soft but filled with warmth. "You came." "I didn't think you'd remember me," she replied, her voice trembling. "I remember everything," he said simply. They stood in silence for a moment, two lives separated by time but still connected by one afternoon in Athens. Giannis led her to center court. On the jumbotron above them, the words appeared slowly, glowing in white letters. "Faith in others always finds its way back." Tears welled in her eyes. "You remembered even that." "It's what got me here," he said. "When I was hungry, when I felt invisible, when people told me I didn't belong, I remembered your voice telling me that learning is a kind of courage. You gave me more than food or lessons. You gave me the belief that I mattered." He gestured for someone to bring a folder. Inside were documents, official, polished, stamped with logos. The Elena Petros Scholarship Fund for the Education of Immigrant and Underprivileged Children in Greece. Elena covered her mouth, overwhelmed. "Giannis, this is too much." He shook his head. "No, this is not charity. This is legacy. You gave me a future. Now it's my turn to give one back." The cameras clicked quietly around them, but neither of them seemed to notice. This wasn't a publicity stunt, it was a full-circle moment that only faith could write. Giannis continued, his tone softening. "You know, people call me the Greek freak, but they forget who made me Greek. You. You taught me what this country could mean. Not the politics, not the systems, but the humanity." Elena's hands trembled as she took the folder. "I never expected this," she whispered. "I know," he said. "That's what makes it real." For the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry freely, not out of sadness but release. The years of struggle, the loneliness, the shame, all of it washed away under the light of this arena. As they sat together afterward, Giannis looked at her with a soft smile. "I used to think heroes were people on posters," he said. "Then I grew up and realized real heroes are teachers who get fired for believing in kids like me." She laughed through tears. "And I used to think students forget their teachers. Some of us never can," he replied. Before she left the arena that day, he handed her something, a framed version of her old drawing, restored and enlarged. Beneath it, written in bold letters, was the phrase that had carried them both through. "Faith in others always finds its way back." And for the first time in decades, Elena believed it completely. By the time the press release hit the headlines, Giannis Antetokounmpo creates scholarship fund honoring his former teacher. Elena Petros was already overwhelmed by messages she could barely keep up with. Emails from journalists, phone calls from Greek educators, and letters from former students poured in like a flood she never expected. But what truly moved her wasn't the attention. It was the realization that something she had done quietly, almost invisibly, had now become a spark lighting up the world. The next morning, Giannis's foundation team invited her to the community center where the scholarship would be formally launched. The building was filled with laughter. Children from immigrant families running through the hallways, their parents watching with cautious hope. On one wall hung a banner that read, "The Elena Petros Scholarship Fund, because every child deserves a chance." When Elena stepped inside, people clapped. She froze, startled, unsure what to do with the sudden warmth. Giannis noticed and smiled. "Get used to it, Miss Petros. The world's finally clapping for the right person." She chuckled through her nerves. "I never liked being the center of attention." "Then this will be good practice," he said. When the cameras started rolling, Giannis took the microphone first. "Years ago," he began, "there was a teacher in Athens who gave her sandwich to a hungry boy. She didn't know that boy would become an NBA player. And that boy didn't know that her faith would shape his whole life. That teacher is standing beside me today, and this scholarship is for every child who needs a Miss Petros in their corner. The room erupted in applause. Elena stood quietly, tears filling her eyes, hands pressed together as if in prayer. When Giannis handed her the microphone, her voice trembled. "I spent many years thinking my life had been reduced to a mistake," she said softly. "But today I understand something my mother once told me, that faith doesn't vanish when it's ignored. It hides in the hearts it touched until it's ready to bloom again." She looked out at the crowd, faces of every color, every story, and smiled. If one child here learns because of this, then every sacrifice was worth it. The scholarship fund started small, 5 students in Athens chosen for their resilience rather than their grades. Within 6 months, it expanded to 50. Within a year, it supported hundreds. Children from refugee camps, from poor neighborhoods, from broken families. And every one of them received not just tuition support, but a message printed on the first page of their acceptance letter. Faith in others always finds its way back. Elena moved to Milwaukee for 6 months to help coordinate the program, working side by side with Giannis's foundation. The two shared quiet moments in between meetings, laughing about classroom memories, about the time Giannis had mistaken there for there on every line of his essay. "You used to tell me, don't worry about mistakes, they mean you're learning," Giannis said one afternoon. "And you proved me right," Elena replied. The more time she spent there, the more she realized how far the ripples had traveled. Teachers from other countries began writing, asking how they could replicate the model. Soon new chapters appeared, one in Nigeria, another in Kenya, one in Turkey, and eventually one in Athens itself, operating out of her old neighborhood. But not everyone knew the story behind the story. The day she lost her job, the years she spent tutoring in silence, the moment she nearly gave up hope. Only Giannis truly understood. That's why when he was interviewed on national television, he said something that made the world pause. "Everyone talks about who inspired me to play basketball. But the truth is, before I learned to play, I learned to believe. And that lesson came from a teacher who saw me when I was invisible." The clip went viral. Within days, social media was filled with tributes, people sharing stories of their own teachers who had changed their lives. The hashtag #TroTDA's Faith Finds Its Way Back began trending across platforms. Elena watched it unfold from her small apartment, still the same humble woman who once walked home with a box of books. But this time, she smiled. Not out of disbelief, but gratitude. She had spent a lifetime teaching children to find their voices. Now the world was using hers to say thank you. One evening, as the sun dipped over Lake Michigan, she sat with Giannis on a park bench overlooking the water. He turned to her and said, "You know, Miss Petros, this isn't just about me. This is about every kid who's ever been told they don't belong." She nodded. "And every teacher who refuses to believe that." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air was calm, the world balanced between silence and meaning. And then Elena said the words that had carried them both through decades of loss and faith. "Faith in others always finds its way back." Giannis smiled, and sometimes it brings the whole world with it. 5 years passed. The scholarship fund had grown beyond anything Elena could have imagined. What began as a single classroom dream in Athens now stretched across continents. Children in Lagos, Istanbul, and Thessaloniki were reading from textbooks stamped with her name. But Elena never sought fame. She still lived simply, still took long walks alone, still wrote lesson plans even though she no longer had a class. To her, the scholarship wasn't about recognition. It was about ensuring no other child felt invisible like Giannis once had. Then, one morning in spring, a letter arrived from Washington, D.C., from UNESCO and the Global Education Alliance. "Dear Ms. Petros, you have been nominated for the International Humanitarian Educator Award. The committee would be honored if you would attend the Global Education Summit next month to share your story." She stared at the words for a long time. It wasn't pride she felt. It was disbelief. After so many years of being silenced, someone wanted to hear her voice again. When she arrived in Washington, the summit hall was vast, full of delegates and teachers from around the world. She recognized no one, but somehow everyone seemed to recognize her. A woman from Kenya hugged her and said, "Your scholarship helped my niece stay in school." Another from India whispered, "You made us believe again." Elena smiled politely, still unsure how to accept gratitude for something she had never intended to become monumental. Moments before her speech, Giannis walked in quietly through a side door. He wasn't scheduled to speak, but he had flown in anyway. "You didn't think I'd miss your big day, did you?" he said with a grin. Elena laughed softly, trying to hide how emotional she felt. "Giannis, I'm not used to stages, I'm used to chalkboards." "Then think of them as your students," he said, "because everyone here came to learn from you." When she stepped onto the stage, the lights felt too bright. She could see her reflection on the large screen, older now, but still with that same calm presence. For a moment, she stood silently, letting the room settle. "2 decades ago," she began, "I lost my job for defending a child who wanted nothing more than to learn. At the time, I thought I had lost everything, but what I didn't understand was that faith, once planted, doesn't die. It waits." Her voice was steady, soft, but every word landed with the weight of truth. "I was told I broke the rules. Maybe I did, but sometimes rules break what's human in us. And when that happens, we must choose compassion over compliance." She paused, glancing toward Giannis in the front row. He smiled, eyes glistening. "That child I defended grew into a man who showed the world that gratitude can build nations. The scholarship you've all heard about, Udaeus, it isn't mine, it's ours, because faith only finds its way back when it's passed forward." The audience rose in a standing ovation. Cameras flashed, but Elena hardly noticed. Her gaze stayed on the children sitting in the front rows, students from around the world wearing badges that bore her name. When the applause faded, Giannis joined her on stage. He took the microphone, his voice deep and warm. "Miss Petros once told me that one act of faith can echo for generations. I didn't believe her back then, but today, I see her echo everywhere. In every student, every teacher, every story of kindness that refuses to die." He turned to her. "You taught me to believe in others. Now you've taught the world to do the same." Elena wiped a tear and whispered, "And you taught me that sometimes it comes back multiplied." The summit ended with both of them standing side by side, framed by the giant screen behind them. Faith in others always finds its way back. That night, as she stood on her hotel balcony overlooking the Washington skyline, Elena thought about her first classroom in Athens. The cracked walls, the hungry children, the noise of chalk on an old board. She realized something profound. She hadn't just changed one boy's life, she had changed the meaning of what it meant to be a teacher. And for the first time, she allowed herself to whisper words that once sounded like a dream, but now felt like truth carved into history. Faith in others always finds its way back, and when it does, it brings light to places that forgot they could shine. The air in Athens smelled different that summer, warmer, sweeter, full of the life she had once thought she'd lost. After nearly 2 decades abroad, Elena Petros stepped off the plane, her suitcase small, her heart full. The Acropolis stood in the distance, framed by the pink light of dawn. This was not the same city that had once turned its back on her. Or perhaps it was. Only now, it finally saw her. She took a taxi through familiar streets. Kypseli, Sepolia, Nea Philadelphia. The same neighborhoods where she used to walk home clutching her worn-out books. The same corners where Giannis and his brothers had sold sunglasses and smiled at strangers who rarely smiled back. Everything looked smaller now. The streets narrower, the walls more faded. But somehow everything also felt sacred. Her first stop wasn't a monument or a hotel. It was Nea Philadelphia Elementary School, the place where her story had both ended and begun. She walked through the gate slowly, her footsteps echoing against the pavement. The school had changed. The walls had been repainted, bright murals of children holding books and basketballs stretched across the courtyard. A plaque hung near the entrance. She leaned closer to read it. Dedicated to Ms. Elena Petros, who taught us that faith in others can change the world. Her breath caught. For a long moment, she simply stood there, her hand over her heart. "Excuse me," said a voice behind her. She turned to see a young teacher, barely 30, holding a folder of papers. "Are you Ms. Petros?" Elena smiled. "I used to be." The woman's eyes widened. "We teach your story here, every year. The children know your name like they know their alphabet." She guided Elena through the hallway. The classroom smelled of chalk and sunlight, just like before. On one wall, there was a framed photograph. Elena standing with her old class, and next to it, a newspaper clipping showing her and Giannis at the scholarship launch in Milwaukee. Children whispered as she passed. One brave boy finally spoke up. "Miss, are you the lady from the story?" Elena knelt to his height and smiled, "Only if it's a good story." The boy grinned. "It is. It's about believing in people." Her eyes filled with tears and she whispered, "Then yes, that's me." The principal, a kind woman named Mrs. Stavru, invited her to speak to the students that afternoon. The assembly hall was full. Small faces watched her with wide eyes, unaware that the woman before them had once been fired from the same building for defending a boy like them. She spoke simply. "When I was your age, I thought heroes were people who never broke rules. But real heroes are those who break the right ones, the rules that stop us from being kind." She paused, scanning the room. "I see that kindness is alive here, and that means my story was never really about me. It was about you, about every child who chooses to believe in others." The applause was quiet at first, then grew louder until it filled the room. And for the first time, Elena didn't cry. She smiled, wide, unguarded, alive. After the assembly, she visited the small memorial garden behind the school. There, surrounded by olive trees, stood a bronze statue of a boy holding a basketball in one hand and a book in the other. At the base, engraved in Greek and English, were the words, "Faith in others always finds its way back." Elena sat on the nearby bench, closing her eyes as the wind rustled through the trees. She thought of her mother, of the nights she'd whispered that phrase in the dark. She thought of Giannis, somewhere across the ocean, still carrying that lesson to every court he played on. Her phone buzzed. A message from him. "I heard you're back home. The kids in Athens send you love. Remember, you started all this." She smiled through tears, typing back slowly. "No, Giannis, we started it together." The sun dipped lower, painting the garden in gold. Children's laughter echoed from the playground nearby, the same laughter she had once feared would vanish. As she stood to leave, she looked back one last time at the statue, at the plaque, at the walls that now bore her name. She realized something profound. Faith had indeed found its way back, but it hadn't just returned to her. It had grown roots deep into the city itself. Walking away from the school, she whispered to herself, as if to the wind, "Kindness doesn't need witnesses to matter. It just needs courage." And somewhere beyond the noise of the city, in a gym filled with cheering fans half a world away, a familiar voice whispered the same phrase to himself before stepping onto the court. "Faith in others always finds its way back." Years passed quietly after that summer in Athens. The world grew louder, faster, more connected, but Elena Petros remained the same, humble, steady, anchored in simplicity. She split her time between Greece and Milwaukee, mentoring teachers, visiting scholarship students, and sending handwritten notes to every young person she could reach. Her hair had turned silver, her hands trembled slightly when she wrote, but her letters still carried the same calm power as her voice once did in the classroom. Her last years were peaceful. She often told people she had everything she ever wanted. Not wealth, not recognition, but the knowledge that her faith had taken root and bloomed far beyond her sight. When journalists asked her how she felt about the global attention, she always said the same thing. I didn't change the world. I believed in one child, and the world changed itself. One morning in early March, as the sun rose over Athens, Elena didn't wake. She passed in her sleep, a gentle departure, as if even time had decided to treat her softly. The news spread quickly, not just in Greece, but across continents. Educator Elena Petros, whose faith inspired generations, dies at 78. Headlines appeared in languages she had once taught her students to read: English, Greek, Spanish, Swahili. In Milwaukee, Giannis Antetokounmpo received the call from her foundation's director. He didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice cracked softly. She kept her promise, and faith found its way home. Days later, he flew to Athens. The streets were filled with flowers, candles, handwritten notes from children she had never met. Outside near Philadelphia Elementary, the school that once fired her, hundreds gathered. Teachers, students, parents, and strangers lined the courtyard in silence as Giannis stepped up to the podium. He took a deep breath, holding a single folded paper, one of Elena's last letters to him. "She once told me," he began, "that kindness doesn't need witnesses to matter. But today I see how wrong she was, because all of you are witnesses. Every one of you standing here is proof that her kindness mattered more than she ever knew." He paused, eyes glistening under the Greek sun. "She didn't just believe in me. She believed in what I could pass forward. And now, it's our turn to keep that belief alive." That afternoon, he announced the creation of the Elena Petros Global Academy, a program combining education, mentorship, and sports for underprivileged youth across the world. The academy would open first in Athens, then expand to Nigeria, the US, and eventually every place where children needed a chance to be seen. Its motto, engraved above every entrance, would read, "Faith in others always finds its way back." As construction began, artists in Greece painted murals of Elena, not as a saint or a celebrity, but as a teacher holding a piece of chalk in one hand and a basketball in the other, smiling gently at a group of children reaching toward the light. Months later, at the academy's grand opening, Giannis stood before a crowd of students from around the world. On stage beside him was a small glass case containing one fragile relic, the crumpled paper drawing of a basketball in a classroom, signed by a young boy years ago. "For my teacher who believes in me." Giannis spoke slowly, voice steady but heavy with emotion. "When I was a child, I thought faith was something you had in God or in luck. Miss Petros taught me that faith can live inside a person, that believing in someone is the holiest thing you can do. She didn't just give me hope, she gave me a map. And that map led me here, to all of you." He looked out at the faces of the first scholarship students, children who came from every continent, wearing shirts that read, "Petros Academy, learn, believe, return." Every time you study, every time you help someone who's struggling, every time you believe when it's easier not to, you're keeping her alive. The audience rose in quiet applause. Many of them didn't know the full story, but they could feel it, that invisible current that connects one act of kindness to another. Later, after everyone had gone, Giannis stayed behind in the gym. The court was empty except for the faint echo of bouncing balls from distant halls. He walked to center court, knelt, and placed the old drawing beneath the polished floor before it was sealed in glass, forever preserved at the heart of the academy. He whispered, "You gave me a classroom when I had nothing. Now I'm giving the world one in your name." The lights dimmed slowly, leaving a single beam shining on the words written across the wall. "Faith in others always finds its way back." Outside, the night of Athens glowed with quiet pride. Somewhere in the soft breeze moving through the olive trees of near Philadelphia, it almost felt as if a gentle voice whispered through the leaves. The same voice that once calmed a hungry boy and taught him to believe. "Teach with heart, and the world will remember." And as long as one child, anywhere on earth, found the courage to believe because someone saw them first, Elena Petros would never truly be gone.